So I told you that the young person, the youth group member who answered that question in the early 2000s was part of a focus group gathered together by what we call a committee on appraisal, which is part of actually something that our faith tradition does regularly, which is really good, which is actually to evaluate how we're doing. And it's not an appraisal that comes from the top down. So the UUA is really only not a governing body in the sense of telling us what to do, but rather a body that facilitates all of the congregations in the association to be the best that we can be. I had a mentor in preliminary fellowship who's one of the wittiest and smartest people I know. And she always said to me, the real first principle of Unitarian Universalism is, you're not the boss of me. Yes? I knew this would resonate. But anyway, this committee, this commission on appraisal was asked to talk to, and they did, thousands of people, youth, elders, everybody in between, ministers, music directors, people, religious professionals, all types, in all sections of the country and in places in other countries where our faith is there, to say, okay, what are we missing? Is there something that we're missing? We know the things we don't like. We don't like anybody being our boss. Many of us come into these pews because we're wounded by the faith in which we were raised. Many of us come because we want community. We know what we don't like, what unites us. We have pluralism, right? We encourage each and every one of you to follow that path of spiritual growth throughout your life, and do our best to support it. Some of us have a profound allergy to the word God, and yet that young person needed to be able to hear that word. What unites us? At the end of a process that, as I say, included thousands of interviews, they published a report in 2005, and as usual, it had many more recommendations than I can share with you. But the bottom line was, what unites us is love. What unites us is freedom. Freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom to be who we are and to be affirmed in our deepest humanity, freedom to affirm one another. I'll share a quote from that report. You use, 2005, you use ranked loving as an instrumental value and mature love as a terminal value, more highly than did respondents from any other group. So love unites us. Freedom unites us. What does that mean? Y'all know I love Hallmark love, right? But it's not that. I love cookies too, sadly. But it's not that. It's putting those two words together, freedom and love, and coming up with love that liberates. Love that quite literally sets us free. And not just us, the privileged few who are in these pews or other pews on a Sunday morning, but that also brings freedom in everything that we do. Love and freedom to anyone we might seek to journey with. to learn from, to partner with. We live in broader communities. You know that. You don't need me to say that. I give you some history because I often think it's important for us to understand the context. This was not new. Love has been part of the Universalists, as you know. The Universalists championed more than 200 years ago the idea that a loving God would never condemn a single human being to eternal punishment. No matter how terrible a human being your friends thought or your enemies thought you might have been, because that's not what love does. There's a story told about Hosea Ballou, the first great theologian of Universalism, and he was in a conversation with someone who basically asked about this. Then, well, if I were a Universalist and I decided that, I wanted to murder you right now and take all the money that you've collected in your church service this morning and run away, wouldn't God punish me? And Ballou said to him, if you were a Universalist, that wouldn't even occur to you. Pretty snappy. That's the degree of mattering that we're talking about. In the last almost 20 years, from 2005 to now, almost 20 years, our faith tradition in our congregations, and everyone at different stages, but this conversation has been continuing. What does love that liberate? How do we live that? What does that really mean? I bring to your attention, there's a version on the front of our order of service today, but the covenant penned by the Reverend James Vila Blake in the early 19th century. He turned out, I didn't know this, he was a hymn writer and a poet. So no wonder his words are so beautiful. But he was a minister at the Unitarian Church in Quincy, Illinois. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now there are other versions as the one on your order of service. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. We are the love people. That may sound weird to you, but that's the truth. We are and have been throughout. So now we come to a year ago in January 2023, and I'm sure that you all have talked about the debates over Article 2. Yes? No? Do you know what I'm talking about? No? Okay, I'll give you a quick reminder. So the board of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the board commissioned a group to look at Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. The UUA was chartered here in Massachusetts, so a set of bylaws is required in order to do that. And the principles, the 7 principles, hopefully soon to be 8, we talk about are part of those bylaws. And when they were written in the early 1960s, nobody expected them to become what they have become at this point, which is kind of our fake creed. What's a UU? Well, this is what people believe, which it's not untrue, but that's not what they were designed for. And the principles are powerful and they're really good, but they're kind of passive for the most part. And so the Article 2 Commission, just like the group that published its report in 2005, met for 2 years. Hopefully folks from this community participated. I know I did. And thousands and thousands of interviews, thousands of conversations. And they created this group, published it a year ago, a group of ideas and concepts and theological, meaning conversations about what matters, right? Things that matter. And theological concepts that unite us. And at the center of that was love that liberates. Love that brings freedom. We all know love that doesn't, that traps us and cages us. But we're focused on the opposite. So that brings me to where we are now. When I say we, I'm talking now not just about the entire association, but the question for you, the congregation, friends and visitors and members of the UU Society of Fairhaven, your leadership, and for me, as your guide, the person who is accompanying you for the next year and a half. Does this congregation matter? What is the spirit of this church? Do you, as a congregation, and I'm asking, these are not loaded questions, and I don't have an answer either way, because I'm a guide. And someone clearly with opinions, but not, this is really, I want to come up with love for us to talk about it together. To look at the mission, your mission for this congregation. Who in here knows it by heart without having to look at the order of service? No shame if you don't. I don't. The purpose, the mattering. I've started to really study some of the documents, historical documents, in an effort to learn more. Looking at reports from 1950 and from 1982. Ashley's helping me look into the farther recesses of documentation. Just to understand, right? Things like, are there challenges that keep coming up? Are there new horizons? What is in the DNA here that might help us as a group work together and look at the 2024 version, the 2024 chapter. How to work on social justice, how to allocate funding in a building that requires a tremendous amount of upkeep. How to fulfill the mission, work with I gather from documents that at one time the congregation had 300 members. All kinds of, is there, and again, this is a question, is there a healthy pattern of saying, hey, let's look at the hard stuff. Let's talk about it. There's an essay by one of my colleagues called The Church That Doesn't Matter. I'll probably put a link up to it if you're interested on Slack. But in The Church That Doesn't Matter, she says, you don't talk about anything because it doesn't matter. Right? Now, most of us don't talk about things because, at least I don't, because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but that's a different story. In early February, I believe February 11th, am I right, Keith? February 11th, this congregation will hold its the congregational meeting that is meant to happen in January, so you can blame me for it being later than usual. But I urge you to mark, after the service, I urge you to mark your calendar for that. Because as a Unitarian Universalist congregation, the power is vested in the congregation. Not in the leadership, not in me, and not in the UUA. And so, my hope, and I think the hope of everyone here, is that this congregation can really have really good, fruitful conversations about how do we move forward. How does this congregation face whatever challenges and successes and things to celebrate? Because there's a lot to celebrate too. I'm going to close by sharing again the words I started with. I wish that there were more of a focus on conversations about theology and beliefs, because I've been personally really struggling with it, and I sometimes get really scared about death and God and where I'm going to go. Because I'm scared to death that there's nothing. And honestly, I'd rather believe in God and heaven and die, believing I'm going somewhere, than just dying and saying, I'm going nowhere. Sometimes I really wish I were a Christian, just so that I'm not scared at night. From one of our Unitarian Universalist youth. Amen, beloveds. Ashe. Blessed be and happy 2020.